Good day, everyone. I am Jaden G. Labrador, the next reporter of Affective Factors. So, now let's talk about inhibitions. Inhibitions is the process of building defenses continues into adulthood. Some people, those with higher self esteem and ego strength, are more able to withstand threats to their existence, and thus their defenses are lower. Those with weaker self esteem maintain stronger walls of inhibitions to protect what is self perceived to be weak or fragile ego, or a lack of self efficacy. The human ego encompasses what Alexander Gora and Madeline Ehrman referred to as language ego, or the very personal, egoistic nature of second language acquisition. When learning a second language, some people build emotional defenses or walls to protect their ego. Those with higher self esteem usually have lower inhibitions, which help them learn more easily. This is connected to the idea of a language ego, how personally we experience language learning. Most SLA involves some degree of identity conflict as learners take on a new identity with their newly acquired competence. An adaptive language ego enables learner to lower the inhibitions that may impede success. Ehrman suggested the significance of thin ego boundaries in some students and thick ego boundaries in others. The openness, vulnerability, and ambiguity tolerance of those with thin ego boundaries create different pathways to success from those with hard driving, systematic, perfectionistic, thick ego boundaries. According to this, learning a new language often involves identity conflict as we take on a new way of expressing ourselves. Some learners have more flexible personalities, the thin ego boundaries, which help them adapt. Others are more perfectionistic, the thick ego boundaries, and that can make it harder to lower their inhibitions. Next is risk taking. Learners have to be able to gamble a bit, to be willing to try out hunches about the language and take the risk of being wrong. Bibb described some of the negative ramifications that foster fear of risk taking in the classroom. A bad grade, a fail on the exam, a reproach from the teacher, a smirk from a classmate. Outside the classroom, L2 learners fear looking ridiculous, a listener blank look, failure to communicate, alienation, and perhaps worst of all, they fear a loss of identity. In risk taking, the language learners need to take risk, like speaking in class or trying out new expressions. But fear of failure, embarrassment, or judgment can stop them. These fears can come from both the classroom and real life situations. The classroom antidote to such fears, according to Dofeu, is to establish an adequate affective framework so that learners feel comfortable as they take their first public steps in the strange world of a foreign language. The implications for teaching are important in a few uncommon cases. Overly high risk takers, as they dominate the classroom with wild gambles, may need to be tamed a bit by the teacher. To help learners take healthy risk, teachers should create a safe and supportive environment. However, those who take too many wild risks might also need guidance to stay focused and effective. Next, in affective factors is anxiety. Intricately intertwined with self esteem, self efficacy, inhibition, and risk taking, the construct of anxiety plays a major affective role in second language acquisition. Even though we all know what anxiety is and we all have experienced feelings of anxiousness, anxiety is still not easy to define in a simple sentence. Spielberger described anxiety as a subjective feeling of tension, apprehension, nervousness, and worry associated with an arousal of the autonomic nervous system. More simply put, anxiety is associated with feelings of uneasiness, frustration, self doubt, apprehension, or worry. So, it explains here that anxiety is a strong emotional barrier in learning. It's the feeling of nervousness or worry that can block a student from participating or doing well, especially when they fear being judged or making mistakes. The research on anxiety suggests that anxiety, like self-esteem, can be experienced at various levels. At the deepest or global level, trait anxiety is more permanent predisposition to be anxious. At more momentary or situational level, state anxiety is experienced in relation to some particular event or act. There are three major types of anxiety in language learning. First is communication apprehension, or fear of speaking or expressing thoughts. The second one is fear of negative evaluation or worry about being judged. And the last one is the test anxiety or stress during exam or evaluation. Yet, another important insight to be applied to our understanding of anxiety lies in the distinction between debilitative and felicitative anxiety, or what Oxford called harmful and helpful anxiety. Spellman and Radnowski preferred to identify tension as more neutral concept to describe the possibility of both dysphoric and euphoric effects in learning a foreign language. More controversially, they earlier argued that anxiety in a foreign language class could be the result of first language deficit, in what they called the linguistic coding deficit hypothesis. Anxiety isn't always bad. It can be helpful if it motivates effort, or harmful if it overwhelms the learner. Some researchers even say anxiety could be caused by the first language issues, like in the linguistic coding deficit hypothesis. In somewhat more recent studies, willingness to communicate and foreign language anxiety were negatively correlated in university students in China. The younger the better. Maxim held up for Dewey, Petridis, and Fernham, as they found that students who were younger when they started learning L2 have lower levels of foreign language anxiety. These and earlier findings reinforce the assertions that self-efficacy and attribution are keys to other affective variables, especially to anxiety, and that pedagogical attentions to foreign language anxiety is of utmost importance. Studies show younger learners tend to have less anxiety, and those with more confidence or self efficacy are better at handling stress. This shows how important it is for teachers to support students emotionally, not just academically. Next is empathy. In common terminology, empathy is the process of putting yourself into someone else's shoes, of reaching beyond the self to understand what another person is feeling. Empathy is a major factor in the harmonious coexistence of individuals in society. Language is one of the primary means of empathizing, but nonverbal communication facilitates the process of empathizing and must not be overlooked. Empathy is the ability to understand how others feel. In language learning, it helps us connect with people, not just through words but also through body language and tone. Psychologists generally agree that there are two necessary aspects to the development of exercising of empathy. First, an awareness and knowledge of one's own feelings, and second, identification with another person. In other words, you cannot fully empathize or know someone else until you adequately know yourself. Gora and his colleagues found that empathy successfully predicted authenticity of pronunciation of a foreign language. To empathize, we first need to understand our own emotions. Some research suggests that learners with higher empathy may develop better pronunciation because they are more sensitive to how others speak. On the other hand, in their search for characteristic of good language learners, they found no significant correlation between empathy and language success. Such conflicting findings are not unexpected, however, because of the difficulty of measuring empathy through either self-check test or visually oriented perception test. Gora micromomentary expression or MME test, it has been shown that such tests appropriately identify personality extremes such as schizophrenic, paranoid, and psychotic behavior, but fail to differentiate among the vast normal population. But not all studies agree. Empathy is hard to measure, and some tests only identify extreme personalities, not small differences in typical learners. So, its exact role in language success is still unclear. Now, let's talk about extroversion and introversion. We are prone to think of an extroverted person as a gregarious, life of the party person, and introverts as quiet, reserved, and reclusive. Such a view of introversion, is misleading. So, extroversion is the extent to which a person has a deep seated need to receive ego enhancement, self esteem, and a sense of wholeness from the other people, as opposed to receiving that affirmation within oneself. Extroverts actually need other people in order to feel good and are energized by interaction with others. But extroverts are not necessarily loud mouthed and talkative, and one of their weaknesses can be a deep seated need for affirmation from others. So, extroverts are energized by others and seek affirmation through social interactions. Introverts, on the other hand, are more inwardly focused and reflective, but both types can be succeed in language learning. Also, introversion, on the other hand, is the extent to which a person derives a sense of wholeness and fulfillment within oneself. Contrary to prevailing stereotypes, introverts can have an inner strength of character, be more attentive to thoughts and concepts, and be energized by concentration on the inner world. Introverts can be pleasantly conversational but simply require more reflection and possibly exercise more restraint in social situations. Introverts may be quiet, but they're often very focused and thoughtful. They tend to reflect deeply and can develop strong language skills like pronunciation through concentration and patience. It is not clear then that introversion helps or hinders the process of second language acquisition. Nyman found no significant effect for extroversion in characterizing the good language learner. Bush explored the relationship of EI to English proficiency in adult Japanese learners of English in Japan. She found that introverts were significantly better than extroverts in their pronunciation performance, suggesting that introverts may have the patience and focus to attend to clear articulation in an L2. Research is mixed. One study found introverts had better pronunciation, others found no major difference in overall success. It depends on the learner's habit and personality. Lastly, Wakamoto found that junior college English majors in Japan who were extroverted were likely to make better use of learning strategies than introverts. These findings suggest that extroverts may have a strategic edge over introverts, but it masks the possibility that extroverts may simply need the strategies in question more than introverts. So, this suggests that some studies show extroverts use for learning strategies, possibly because they learn best through interaction, but this doesn't mean extroverts are weaker learners. They may simply need fewer strategies or use them differently. That concludes my report on the affective factors affecting second language acquisition. So now, to continue our presentation, let me turn you over to our next reporter who will discuss the next topic. Thank you.